Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Welcome to Prose and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast, the podcast by emerging writers for emerging writers, because sometimes we feel like prose and sometimes we feel like cons. I am Paddy Boylan. I am hosting for today, and joining me are my esteemed colleagues, Alex Eldridge.
Hey, my name's Alex. I am a writer. I have put out a collection of short stories, as well as publishing in a few magazines and things, the most recent of which was the Big Issue Fiction Edition. So, yeah.
Which was a big deal in the Big Issue.
It was fun.
Yeah.
I liked it.
And Phoenix Raig.
Hello. I too am a writer. That's why I'm here. I'm the founder of Bentlight Writing, home to a number of editing services that I employ internationally, and as well as I have done some work with an agent, and that's been a wonderful experience.
You're an agented children's book author.
It's true.
Pretty neat.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a creative writing teacher, editor, bid writer, and sometimes fiction editor. And altogether, we are 3/6 of Precipice Fiction. Matan, Ali, and James can't make it this week. They're off having adventures. So, gentlemen, the topic for today is Show Don't Tell, which, I mean, I was going to ask you if you guys have heard of it, but I think there's a good chance that you and most people listening to this will have heard of the aphorism, show don't tell. It's so often said and bandied about as one of the biggest truisms in writing. But is it necessarily true? Do we always want to show and not tell? Are there times when telling is actually a good idea? And what are the nuances of show don't tell? How can we make it work for us in our own writing? I'm looking forward to getting into this topic. It's something that
I love this one.
It's a juicy one.
You're an editor, Phoenix, and no doubt you will have written stuff about showing, not telling so many times in the line notes on given edits.
Mm-hmm.
It's big.
It's very true.
Big. It's around. So before we get into that, why don't you guys tell me a little bit about what you've been reading since the last time we talked?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I've been going through... what have I been reading?
Feels like an existential one this morning. It's like, what am I reading these days?
What have I been? Well, look, I can say this. I am a judge for one of the categories of the Aurealis Awards. I can't say which one, obviously.
Are you really?
Yeah.
It's
Right.
enormous.
Honestly, they take anyone. Like, it's just a form.
Don't
but I am doing that. So I'm going.
That's you. You are. You've got published works now. You've got 2. You're out there. You've been paid for your work.
Yeah.
Remember the literati.
That's true. I suppose so. I suppose. I mean, they did ask me what I'd done and what my reference to writing was. So I suppose that took. They could have rejected me.
Absolutely.
This is a
but yeah, I'm going through that.
Yeah.
I'm going through a couple of awards. A couple of books from that. Like I said, I don't want to say what the specific genre I'm judging is, because that's a conflict of interest. But I'm going through that, and there's a lot of different works there, a lot of different skill levels in that, and I'm sort of working my way through that. Some things are better than others, but yeah, I've just been working my way through a couple of those books. It's books. I am reviewing books, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot to get through. It feels like homework. It feels like I'm back in uni again.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's what I've been reading.
Entire books.
Like lots of them, like 10 of them.
Wow.
I mean, you have a fair time to read it.
Is that a paid gig?
No.
Okay.
No.
It's a kudos gig.
I feel like I might have. It might have been the one that they just shunt off to all the first timers, like the one I picked specifically, because it is there's a lot of books. Am I going to finish them all?
Are you going to go slowly mad? Maybe. But it's going to look great on the resume, so that's what it's all about, right?
I guess, yeah, for sure. I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah, I suppose so. And, there's networking, I suppose, to some extent, so that's cool.
Mm.
Okay. Alex, reading a massive pile of books of varying and questionable quality. Phoenix, what have you been up to reading, watching, playing?
The last week and a half or so, I edited. So one thing I've been recently doing is Bentlight Writing has been partnering with small publishing houses in Australia. So I started editing for some of them, and So for the last week and a half, I was proofreading / copy editing this one book, and it was just very good. I can't say anything about it, but like it was like 100K word novel that I shotgunned in a week and a half, and it was a very good book. And that's one thing I'm really enjoying about working for publishing houses now, is because the quality of work that I'm sent is so much. There's kind of like a bar of entry.
Yeah.
So seeing as it's already gone through a filter, it's like, oh wow, pretty beefy piece of literature that I got to read, which was beautiful. And then I've been plowing through a D&D Let's Play through Dimension 20 called Never After. And it's slowing down a little bit in the middle, but I still love it. The beginning was fire. I was so into it.
And Let's Play is like an audio podcast where people play an engaging game of Dungeons and Dragons and dramatize it for you, right?
Mm-hmm. And then this one comes with video as well. And the video is pretty cool too. Their production value is actually very high.
Okay. Very cool. What was that called again?
Never After, and it's done by Dimension 20.
Never After. Check that out if you're interested in watching some entertaining nerds play Dungeons and Dragons.
Especially if you like kind of spooky, grim fairy tale type flavor. That's nice. What this one is about, or working with.
Very cool. Very cool. I myself, I've just finished a short story by what's his name? He did Rendezvous with Rama, Arthur C. Clarke. It's called The 9 Billion Names of God, which I picked that up because like the name itself is just fire.
That's a title.
Yeah, and the ending to this is particularly good. I'm not going to give away what happens, but the premise is in the 60s, a Tibetan monastery hires a computer engineer. That's all I'm going to say. It's it's good. It's good. It's got a really weird take on theology. Show don't tell. During a TED talk, the head of Pixar, Andrew Stanton, once said the following: "Make the audience put things together. Don't give them 4. Give them 2 + 2. What did he mean by this? Well, let's say we have a scene of a dirty-looking child, and they're staring through a window with longing in their eyes, and beyond the glass is a family sitting down to a large and delicious-looking meal. Now, we're not told that the child is an orphan, that they're very hungry, or that they wish they had a family. Instead, we're given clues, imagery, moments, expressions, and invited to construct the truth for ourselves. Readers or watchers or players of games, humans in general, we love the process of putting things together. It's often said that we're meaning-finding machines and we're hungry to decode the world. And the difference often between a really good book or TV show or whatever and one that's maybe kind of doing it by the numbers is one that paints a scene and kind of invites you into it and invites you to make sense of it, versus something that's really kind of on the nose and maybe a little over-obvious. I'm sure as I'm saying this, you guys are thinking of examples of both that you've seen. Texts that do it really well and texts that do it a little ham-fistedly. But today we're going to examine that concept, which is show, don't tell, something that's often talked about, often misunderstood. And once you've got a handle of it, a really powerful concept in writing. I mean, I'm assuming both of you guys have a pretty strong handle of the concept of show, don't tell, but you might have some different ideas about it. Alex, what comes to mind for you when you hear that phrase?
The thing that comes to mind for me immediately when I think of that, anytime I think of that, is don't bore the audience. Don't bore the audience. Yeah. It's like, okay, so the reason why I love and glom onto the concept of show, don't tell, maybe even to my detriment, as I get further on into my writing career, is that it's a concept that is synonymous with concision. The idea is you want to pare things down in such a way that, like you said, the audience can put these things together. So, like, it's a lot more efficient for me to even write that scene. Like they say, a picture paints 1,000 words, but I don't think that's true. It's a lot more efficient for you to write that small scene, especially if you're good at writing quite concisely. And I think I've got a skill in that. Than it is to explain the orphan's backstory, to explain how he got there, like to write all these things out. So yeah, one thing, I think it's concise. I think that's one very potent element of it. Also, show don't tell is inherently action. So show don't tell, I think, just says provide me with action, provide me with something happening. It doesn't matter if that's like a highway chase, or like someone running after someone, or a gunfight, or even just two people talking. It is inherently action, and that inherently moves the plot forward. That's kind of the two main takes on Show Don't Tell I would sort of have.
So I'm actually doing this off the back of teaching a class with it. I teach creative writing to kids, and I've got some very talented writers in my class, but one thing that they often do is, rather than have like a dialogue scene happen, they'll just tell you that the characters had this conversation. So I find myself often saying like, well, why don't you instead show us the conversation? Give us the actual dialogue, even if you only give us like a little bit of it. And immediately they're like, oh yeah, that'd be so much more engaging. So when you say action, I mean, obviously action is something broader than like action scenes. It's just things happening in the present moment on the page, right? Phoenix, what about you? I mean, obviously you've encountered this a million times in editing.
For me, it's like it's more like engaging the senses as opposed to engaging the brain. And obviously when readers are reading, their brain's always engaged, but it's the idea of, to me, it makes the literature more engaging and puts the reader more in the place, as opposed to them feeling like they're being told a story. They're more so feeling like they're experiencing the moment a bit more. And one example that I had of this, I had one client who was writing a scene where their main character and a side character were walking through like a courtyard of a castle or something like this. And they were just saying the castle the environment was scary. It was creepy. And I was just like, well, rather than tell me it's creepy, this can be an opportunity it's an invitation to play with the space a bit more. Rather than tell me it's creepy, tell your reader it's creepy, show them the environment and let the reader decide it's creepy. Like, describe elements of the environment, like, is the light bending at queer angles? Is there an odd hollow dripping sound? Whatever it is that creates this sensation of creepy, and let the reader feel the creepiness as opposed to just telling them it's creepy. It can also be an opportunity to show some subtle character building. By describing the scene through a character's lens, you can show some element of subjectivity, what they're finding creepy about the scene, and build sort of a sense of like what they find creepy, what's putting your characters off a bit in that moment. And it's a really big opportunity, as opposed to just kind of giving adjectives you want your reader to sort of slap onto the scene.
Yeah, it almost sounds like providing examples in the scene. But you back things up, you back up the information with these sensations and examples and things that are happening in the moment. But what's interesting is, and I think this is why I didn't actually understand this concept for a long time. People would say it and I'd smile and nod, but not really have a handle of it. Because both of you guys, I think, are totally right in your definitions. But Alex, you were talking about it as taking things out and knowing what to subtract, whereas Phoenix, your examples were all about adding more in.
It's actually additional,
and both are true. So I'm hoping that as we talk about this, we can start to drill down into why both the things are true, and sort of like the real purpose for what this does behind that. So just for a little bit of background, the concept of Show Don't Tell is credited to the Russian playwright Anton Chekhov of Chekhov's gun fame. You guys have heard of Chekhov's gun, right? Yeah, the idea of in the first act there's a gun on the mantelpiece, by the end of the play the gun needs to go off. It's about being economical with details. He said, don't tell me the moon is shining, show me the glint of light on broken glass. What do you guys think of that quote? Don't tell me the moon is shining, show me the glint of light on broken glass.
Well, what he's done in that quote brilliantly is sort of what my version of the concision there. And as you said, these are not mutually exclusive concepts. This is just the one that I tend to focus on, because everything I do, I try and narrow down to like the finest possible point I can. But that's not to say that you can't take it the other way. So he says, don't show me that. Can you
don't tell me the moon is shining, show me the glint on broken glass. Show me the glint of light on broken glass.
So in that quote, the second half of that sentence is just so much more engaging, because to my point in concision, it's not actually a shorter sentence than the "Don't tell me the moon is shining." Like, objectively, there's more material there, but the extra detail and flavor it provides in there, like, tell me it sounds nice for a start, but also the implication that there is broken glass tells us that something has happened. It sets up an open loop. It implies that there has been conflict, and it basically creates this sense of mystery. So that quote is actually doing a lot, which I think is kind of the point he's trying to make.
I think it is.
By creating these little things that you can experience, like, sensually, in this case, like, we can kind of see the broken glass that's reflecting off the moonlight. In showing us those details, you imply a lot of other things, like, who broke the glass? Was it broken recently? Did this happen at there's a lot of things that can be drawn out of that. And you could add further to that. You could say the glint of blood on the broken glass. Oh, well, now we know someone's been physically injured, and that's only another 2 words. So that's what I was kind of meaning by concision there. I'm sorry if I'm harping on that concept, but it's just
it's a good concept.
Yeah, and importantly, when you say "show me the glint of light on broken glass," he's not saying the moon was shining and the light was glinting on the broken glass. So there is information being taken up there. You're never actually told that the moon is shining at all. You're only seeing the effects of the moon on the world, which is like a more interesting and engaging thing. So Phoenix,
I think to your point as well. Sorry, Paddy. I think to your point as well. The thing you said initially about having the audience put things together. That's part of it as well. It is in excising details that the audience is able to put things together. So not only is it more efficient, it actually brings the audience more into it. One thing that beginning writers learn very quickly is that if you provide too much detail, if you're doing a car chase and you describe exactly how the cars run into each other, that's a lot of information for a brain to mentally construct, right? And if you don't describe it just so, and actually even if you do describe it just so, it is physically fatiguing to work that out. So not only is there a lot of work, you actually also take agency away from the reader being able to construct this in their own mind in whatever kind of, like, I didn't tell you exactly how the glass is, smashed or broken over each other. You have to think of that image yourself. So you're giving the reader a sense of agency to create that image themselves.
Yeah. Have you guys seen, because the original quote, and I'll give it again because it is really good. Make the audience put things together. Very good quote. Don't give them 4, give them 2 + 2. So that's by the head writer. It just says the head of Pixar. Have you guys seen the film Up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful film. And it's got that beautiful, heartbreaking extended scene at the beginning that goes for 5-10 minutes of like this whole guy's life. There's no dialogue at all. They're literally just like showing you scene by scene what happens, and not even in an overt way. Like, spoiler, when we know that the guy's wife dies, they don't even show her dying. I think they just show her absence. So that's
like the armchair. Isn't there an empty armchair or something?
Something like that. It's been a minute.
But I don't even know. They might have a grave, or he's either standing by a grave or he's standing alone on a hill.
Both of those things sound right, but I think I might be confabulating. The point is, there's
but it is absence.
Yeah, these wonderful like little suggestions of what's going on, and it's enough to go, oh no, she died, rather than telling you that she died. So Phoenix, back to "Don't tell me the moon is shining, show me the glint of light on broken glass." What came to mind when you heard that?
Well, for me, like, I don't know. I guess I wouldn't describe myself as tactile, but I might describe myself as textural, especially when it comes to writing.
Okay.
I love creating senses of texture, and even in places where it doesn't necessarily make sense, like in combat, I might give something that actually can't exist in the real world, but it paints the moment.
I remember you describing your work as like, it's synesthetic at some point, which is true, and it's a really nice little touch.
Yeah. So glint of moonlight on broken glass, for me, it gives me a texture, broken glass, and it just like pulls in so much more of my senses, as well as it is like Alex was saying. I'll just build off of that. It's like, it's such an amazing lead in to start a sentence with "the moon was shining," then in your next sentence, you need to then provide a hook for what's going to happen. Whereas if you start with this, the light reflected off broken glass, you already have your run-in to immediately flow into what you're going to say next. It's kind of like Deadpool, where you start on the cigarette lighter flying through the air, and then you do your zoom out of what's going on in this scene. It's a very good moment to moonlight on broken glass, and you already have your seed for how you build the scene around it, and that it is very succinct.
Yeah, very succinct. There's of course, like a real difference in the approach to showing and telling, and we've been saying during this whole thing that telling is wrong, showing is right. But I'd like to take a sort of a step back and look at what both are for. Telling is factual.
Hot take.
What? Hot take?
I said hot take.
This is a warm take.
It's a warm take.
This is a take that I think everyone can get behind, but it might be
it's true.
Little titillating. Telling is factual. Telling gets the point across quickly and directly. If you're writing, say, a technical manual, you want to tell them. You might give an example, but that's as a secondary thing to straight up telling. It's a little less rich, a little less poetic, but what it does is get the point across quickly. Showing tends to be more emotional. It engages us. It causes and invites us to imagine a scenario. Obviously, when a reader's emotions are engaged, they start to imagine details, they become more drawn into the story, they care about characters more, they start to think things more vividly. But I think there are times when you want to tell. What do you guys think of that idea? Are there times in your writing where you just straight up tell the reader without having to go through the rigmarole of talking about the light glinting off the broken glass?
One person that has done this really well and got me to appreciate the art of telling, like it helped me a lot actually, was Scott Lynch in The Lies of Locke Lamora.
Okay, I've heard you guys talking about this a lot.
Yeah, so it's an audiobook I listened to, and it was very like he does an excellent job of like, it's like it can be used as a pacing tool as well as like.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean as a pacing tool? Like, because that's an interesting point right there.
Yeah, so like in your ebb and your flow of your book, as you're zooming in on scenes and zooming out sort of thing, you'll have these moments of really dense, more actiony scenes where you're kind of playing play by play, clip by clip, feeling by feeling, and you're right there in the character's skin, experiencing the moment. And then there's moments where you'll zoom out, you'll back away from maybe everyone and kind of focus on the world as a whole, or the city as a whole, or whatever, and you might give a bit of history, a bit of information that sort of enlivens kind of with a broader brush stroke.
The guy actually uses footnotes in his book, doesn't he? Or am I thinking of a different book?
Not that I know of.
Okay, I'm thinking of something else. Never mind.
That's Infinite Jest that he uses them in. It might not be the one you're thinking about, but he definitely doesn't.
He might have them in Lies of Locke Lamora, but I listened to it, so I don't know. Probably but he does this amazing thing where it almost felt like every chapter kind of started with like, let me tell you about the world a little bit. Let me tell you about the city a little bit. Let me explain this political thing of significance. And then you kind of drop into the scene slowly from there. And that's more so in the beginning, when he is more so constructing the world and building significance towards certain things. And he does it a bit less later in the book.
You know what it kind of sounds like? Do you know the trope of like the Twilight Zone, where at the beginning of every episode they would go like, see Karen, 28-year-old woman living in New York. Karen has a particular problem with, and then it kind of drops you in, which is really engaging. So, I don't know, giving that like authoritative
50s
at the beginning.
Too.
Yeah, but it's, I don't know, it works.
It has a very like,
That's what came to mind when you described that.
It is a bit like that. And it just created this really nice moment where like, the scenes got me hooked in the characters and in the people we're actively with. And because I was then hooked in the characters, I was on board for the world building and these larger scene setting pieces. Because I was like, well, I'm into this story. So now I'm here to hear that. Now I do want to hear your world building and stuff like that. Yep. And so it was a nice palette cleanser from like history. And then you have your action, you're close in. And then you have your palette cleanser from that dense close in, and you zoom back out a bit. And it was a nice up and down.
That sounds like a perfect example of when telling rather, is actually really effective. What about you, Alex? When's an example of when you've told and not shown?
Yeah. Well, yeah, building on what Phoenix was saying, there's a quote or something where the guy says something like, I don't care about the what until I care about the who. Right? So the best way to introduce us to characters is to show them in media res, in action, so we get a sense of who they are. If you immediately tell me someone's whole backstory without knowing anything about them, unless you're a very good writer, and there are people who can do it, I'm just going to be bored to tears, and I'll just be like, I don't care about this.
Yeah.
So I think telling is a very powerful way to get that backstory information, which is important, which is necessary once you have hooked us in with the showing aspect or some way to connect us to the character. One thing I think about when I think about show don't tell is actually some advice, something you told me about the first book I wrote, Challenger. And I remember you said, I really like it. I really like all these scenes, and the way it sort of goes through it, but it feels like they're a little disconnected. And I took that away and sat with that advice for a little bit. And I realized it was because I was just giving a lot of scenes that would just show. And there was nothing that really linked them together in terms of a telling, in terms of a greater narrative.
Oh, that's it.
How
you know
this
what?
fits into things.
Because as you were saying that, I was remembering that was the case, but that's exactly it. There was no in the world in the year 2023, Earth is blah 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 blah. That yeah.
And it's a shame actually, because the first time when I went through it, I actually did have a little bit of it, and I took it to the writing group, and they were like, "Oh no, you can't do that. Don't do that. Don't do any of the background stuff." And then I immediately felt like I kind of got burnt, and I was like, "Oh well, I'll just do it."
When you're done, let's talk about show don't tell as a truism. Sorry to interrupt, but I really want to touch on this idea that it's like this. You gotta show don't tell. You can't not, and that's sometimes
you gotta show don't tell.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no,
please
totally.
Finish.
But I think the telling is really important in I always come back to the example of Richard Russo, because he is just one of my favorite authors, and I think he's one of the best persons, the best at doing this.
So what has he written?
He's written it's a Pulitzer Prize winner, Empire Falls. He also written Nobody's Fool. Actually, also, funnily enough, wrote Straight Man, which is the basis of the new series. Not that new now. It's the series Lucky Hank by the guy who did Breaking Bad. So he wrote that book, and then the screenplay was based on that. I haven't seen it, but I am really, really keen to. So he writes things in very Dickensian third person. So there's very clearly, and we talked about this a little bit in the Viewpoint, this Perspectives episode, but in this third person, I am telling you things with a wink and a nudge, and he has access to all these people, but he'll work, he'll do a lot of telling in terms of this person had got up to this, and the reason why they did that was because this, and back in the day they'd been like this, and then they went to this bar and they met this person, they were like, hey, you should do this thing, and they're like, oh, I guess I'll get into plumbing. And so you have these long paragraphs which are very witty and clever and stuff, and he might be one of those people who goes back to that thing where he can just tell without I can't remember if any of the books start with that. I think they actually do, and there's just hey, I'm just going to tell you how this happened.
But it sounds to me like the keywords there are witty and smart. It's engaging writing, and that's I'm assuming what carries the telling.
I mean, I think so. Maybe it is just a quality of writing thing, and I can't really give you any hard examples of why that is so. I think he's just good at it, and that just comes from experience. But that's an example.
I feel like a big part of it is just they're both equally valid tools, and in the end, don't force it. Sometimes there are moments where, and this is where an editor can come in handy, or a proofreader or a friend, whatever. If there are moments where someone's dropping off, getting bored, something like that, maybe it's an invitation to explore showing, pull them in more. If someone's feeling too bogged down, too in the moment, it's too dense or whatever, maybe it's an opportunity to tell. Maybe that scene's not necessary, and you can just give me a few lines, just tell me it happened, that's fine. I don't know. Like I was just this book is an anomaly. Blood and Fire by George R. Martin. I've
They're
got
not
it
just
here
props,
behind
they're
me.
actual books.
They're real
Phoenix is
books,
reaching
yes.
to the bookshelf
They don't have
behind him,
pages.
dear listener.
Yes, here it is, far on the left. That book is like all
Keep his
telling,
tobacco in them.
and
Yeah, it's like an encyclopedia,
and
right? Or like a history of.
it's like a retelling. It would be
Copy of it
like
as well.
the scrolls of history as written by the Meisters of the time, like just recounting the age of the Targaryens and how they came to Westeros and all this stuff. And it's done from a very like eagle's eye point of view, because you're essentially looking back on history. But he does it in this way where it's like pure telling, more or less, because obviously he does some tricks where even though it's an eagle's eye view, he is showing you stuff. Even though it's history, he does it in a way where, you know, showing doesn't necessarily mean you're in the moment. But
I'm guessing he'll jump into like scenes of like real historical events where he'll talk about like a famous conversation with a king and the jester and stuff like that, right?
Yes. And the thing is because it's I guess the real thing is he's showing, but because it's done from a historical point of view, it's like the details of the feelings and the moments of combat are skimmed over pretty quickly, but he still does the build of tension and then the release of tension, and that's what keeps you engaged. But it's so artfully done, the fact that it's like this style, and when I'm reading it, I am very engaged. It's very impressive.
To me, it sounds like any number of like wikis that are out there. Like I mean, you guys are all demi geeks. Like every now and again, you'll find like a book or universe or something and go to the wiki for it and just get absolutely absorbed. And that's all just information. Like it's an encyclopedia of fictional nonsense, but it's really engaging. To me, I think when you're in the market for that, like when you know that's what you're going in for and you're after that pure information, then tell. You don't want to be shown. You want to be told straight up. So maybe it's a case of expectation as well.
That's 100% something I could listen to as an audiobook, just like doing some work or walking around or whatever. You know, just like, just tell me all the stuff. It's a biography, you know, like.
The example I've got is, do you guys know the SCP Foundation?
Yes.
It's absolutely wonderful, Phoenix. I think you should check it out. It's an online collective. It's not even a collective. It's like people can just write on this website, but they're writing for this fictional universe where there's this organization called the SCP Foundation, which is Secure, Contain, Protect. And they're like a shadowy organization that is keeping at bay all of the bizarre, cosmic, like this would break reality if it got out horrors. So, I mean, this is just pulling something out of my ass, but like everything's written in the form of like kind of a government document, like code X1785 redacted class C threat. By no means approach this anomaly without proper protective gear. Then they'll list the protective gear. And then it'll be like, do not hum. Under no circumstances must anyone hum as they enter this room. Humming will cause the anomaly to become very distressed. Once distressed, the anomaly will... And they tell a story just through this like legalese, like technical speak. And they're kind of showing because like they never start by telling you what the anomaly is. It's always stuff like that. Like, wait, don't hum? What is this thing? And slowly they'll start to drop the good ones anyway. This is a collective. So there's, some are better than others, but they'll start to drop hints as they go as to what this thing may or may not be. It's all telling, but telling in a really artful way. And there are ones that show, and I don't think they're as good. When dialogue comes into it, you're like, nah, I want the technical details. Give me the government dossier.
Know what this is about.
It sounds a lot like Welcome to Night Vale, or it reminds me of it. It's a podcast.
I've heard of this. My sister-in-law listens to it.
It's great.
It's a
podcast where it's just someone giving a news report for a town called Night Vale, and through the news report, the delivery of the news and like some news updates, there's something weird going on, and you kind of piece together what's up. There's a little bit of an arc and stuff like that. But it's not like breaking news, aliens or blah, 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 blah. It's very like calm and very surreal. And it's like, note to all park walkers today, do not approach the tree behind the school. The shadowy figure there does wish to be left alone and should not be approached under any circumstances.
This is right in my wheelhouse, actually. I really want to listen to this now.
You would probably love it.
Yeah,
it's pretty fun. It is pretty fun.
I guess that there is always a time for telling. Telling is important. And the example I was going to have for more conventional fiction. I mean, this is all stuff we're talking about now that's specifically designed as a telling medium. But sometimes you just want to tell us that the character traveled. Like, you just want to tell us that they got in the car and drove. You don't need to show them getting the keys, opening the door,
Yeah.
turning on the radio. Sometimes it's not important. Telling can be a really good way of just saving time. I'm thinking to Fight Club. I haven't read the book, but in the film, do you remember toward the end, Edward Norton's character is like kind of flying around America looking at all these different fight clubs that have been set up by quote unquote Tyler Durden. And he's just telling us, he doesn't bother to show us the details of every one. It's just like going to narration mode, like quickly, like New York, Seattle, Chicago, these things are everywhere. They were set up more than I could have imagined. How could he possibly have done this in such a short time? And it's simply a time-saving measure, but it works really well though.
Yeah, to me, that brings me back to like, don't force it. I've found myself in moments where I'm like, ooh, I got to get to this one scene. But I've had moments like that where I'm like, but first I just got to get them into their car, and then I got to drive them there. It feels like this very mundane, like, oh, what am I doing? And in those moments, you can just say, just in one line, give some colorful descriptor of them getting to the place. Like if you know where your next point of juiciness is and that's where you need to go, just like get yourself there. And all you need to do is make sure the reader goes there with you, and then like bring in that levity, just shoot them there, get to the important part. Cause that's what your story's there for, is the important part, the context that is going to deliver the story to your reader.
What's that quote about writing being life without the boring bits?
Who's that? That's yes, he's the guy who, like, Jackie Brown is based on his book. What's his name? I love that guy. I can't remember it.
Point is, sometimes it's just a good way of like getting rid of the chaff.
Yeah, it's basically like when you're telling, like, you can just jump around to the bits that are important and let the story dictate when you go to those different parts. Like, there are different speed. Okay, to use a really clunky metaphor, it's like when you're driving a car. If anyone's driven a manual car before, when you start off, you're in first gear, and that's like really high revs, and it's very like, it would be very close to like action, like showing, right? And as you get onto the highway, you switch onto another gear, and that's third gear, and that or fifth gear, and then like it's kind of further out. It's zoomed out a little bit more. The car is moving faster. There's not as much, like high revs and things. This is really, really terrible analogy, but basically you're switching between different gears, different modes, and you want to let the story dictate when you do each of those modes. Don't try and force something just because, I mean, it's easy to fall into the mode of just doing what you know how to do. And that's certainly what I've done a lot of times. I just do the things that I know how to do. But yeah, sometimes you need to lean out and, each of those ways of doing it have different idioms. Some are a little more flowery, or some are a little more formal, or some are the very just like bullet point by bullet point. But it's important to recognize the cadence of what you're writing and follow that where it goes.
Totally. Telling and showing are both different tools in the toolbox, right?
Yeah, they're tools. Yeah. Don't be a man with a hammer.
You and Matan independently arrived at the same analogy. He'd also described it as shifting gears in a car. And honestly, like that was helpful for me when he said it. I'm like, oh, they are different speeds. That is what they're doing.
Yeah. He probably just described it better.
For those who has never driven a manual, we completely blank out. But that's okay.
Yeah.
Like Philistines.
If you haven't driven a manual, you're not going to know.
Yeah, we can guess.
But to what I just said, don't be a man with a hammer. To the man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and the hammer is not the only tool. You gotta look in your toolbox and see, oh well, actually this is a screw. Maybe I'll just screw it in gently instead of pounding it into the wall.
Yeah, I think that works. I want to give, and we're coming close to the end here, but I've got a beautiful example of the American author Charles Frazier. I actually am not very familiar with his stuff, but he's got a novel called Cold Mountain, which I actually really want to read now. And he's got a beautiful description of I won't even tell you. He doesn't tell you. He just shows. The hayfield beyond the beaten dirt of the school playground stood pant waist high, and the heads of grass were turning yellow from need of cutting. The teacher was a round little old man, hairless and pink of face. He owned but one rusty black suit of clothes and a pair of old, overlarge dress boots that curled up at the toes and were so worn down that the heels were wedge-like. He stood at the front of the room, rocking back and forth on the points. Absolutely love that. I can imagine. I
very
understand
good.
so much about that town without him telling me a single thing.
It's almost like showing. It's like almost like showing is. It's almost like indirect telling. Tell me about the thing adjacent, and then I'll create the thing next to it.
Yeah, he's showing us the moonlight.
Yeah.
He's showing us the glint.
Tell me the things. Tell me the things that I can put together to form a gestalt of this scene.
Phoenix, do you want to wrap us up with a quote?
I'd love to do that. So our good friend Jeff Sommers once said, "The problem with show don't tell isn't that it's inherently bad advice. It's that people understand it to mean you can never tell the reader anything, and that's simply not true."
Very wise advice.
Nice.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Well, that does it for Show Don't Tell. Listeners, if you've enjoyed this, if you've got something out of it, please consider rating and reviewing. We'd love a 5-star review, but review it honestly. Give us feedback if you want. Anything at all helps, and it particularly helps the algorithm. It's the only way we can really get seen. Also, if you're interested in what we do, we three are part of a collective of 6 people called Precipice Fiction. We have an anthology of science fiction, horror, and sci-fi. It is called The New Mythic. It is out now on Amazon, and it contains 2 Aurealis-nominated writers. So how's that for authority?
And an Aurealis judge, apparently.
Well, not of that one,
judge.
No, not of that one.
Well, this has been great. Thanks, guys. We're Precipice Fiction. Join us again next week for more talking about writing, and we'll see you then.
Yeah, see ya.
See you, folks.
Bye-bye.
You're listening to Prose and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.